everyone, and welcome to today's edition of mindFly webinars, where we will talk about cameras in the cockpit and privacy. I'm Sqn Ldr Sargam, and before we begin, I would like to remind you all that the webinar is being recorded and will be available for you to view later on different platforms. Also, I request all of you to please keep your audios on mute and videos off as well. We encourage your questions, and I would request you to type your questions in the chat box. Also, if you would like to speak, please raise your hands or just send a message and we would unmute you and you will be able to speak. And we will now begin with a presentation by Captain Amit Singh, who's been an aviator for the last 30 years. He's a safety and training expert and a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. He's also the author of the blog mindFly. Over to you, Captain Amit.
Thank you very much, and welcome to yet another episode of mindFly webinars. We also have the mindFly blog, as well as we're sharing all these recordings on other platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube Live. Today is a special episode in the sense that we are discussing something which is very new, or rather which is most likely going to happen, which is the cameras in the flight deck. So are we open to this new, or rather open to privacy? What are the privacy laws? What are the other countries doing about it? So let's go through a small presentation about it. Then we can have a discussion, or if anybody wants to suggest something, then we can open the mic and have your suggestions too. Going ahead with the presentation. So the background is that there have been a number of accidents, and primarily most of the accidents were being investigated in the United States by the NTSB, which is the National Transport Safety Board. And there were certain recommendations which were given to the FAA. So even though they are recommendations, there has to be some logic for the FAA to accept it or not to accept. Either the cost in the industry or the time or some training requirements. At the end of it, we have to look at safety, how well safety can be enhanced, or are there other means through which we can comply. Now, the history of recorders starts with the World War II, when in the DC-6, there were a number of fires.
Captain Amit, we can't see the presentation yet.
Yep. Okay. The reasons for the fires were not known. So the default option is the pilot. So pilot error was blamed in a number of fires. Till there was an accident in United Airlines. A DC-6 of United in 1947 crashed, but prior to the crash, the pilot was able to communicate to the ATC about the fault. Through this, NTSB investigated further, and they came to know that it was not a pilot error in the earlier crashes, there was a design issue. And in the previous webinars also, we have covered about design aspects of aircrafts. And it is not just the pilots who are responsible for all the accidents, but it is the easiest option to blame the pilot. So in these cases, it was found that if the accident investigators had some more access to vital information, they would have given a better probable cause and fixed the cause earlier rather than having so many accidents. So there was a need to devise a system which recorded certain parameters to give the information, and that with the advent of the early stages of flight recorders, wherein it was just a foil and it recorded about 5 parameters, the principal parameters: airspeed, height, vertical speed, altitude. So in the 1950s, it started, but formally it came out in 1985 in Annex 6, wherein it was mandated by ICAO for a certain category of aircrafts as per the weight to have the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder installed. So that became the crash-proof black box. Now, there were certain unexplained accidents. In all, it is just 4 accidents. The Egypt Air accident, so there are different theories about it. Was there a fire on board, smoke, or did the observer take over the flight controls? Similarly, in the Silk Air accident, a lot of speculation was there because the exact reason was not known. Other 2 incidents are pretty old, ValueJet and another similar one. But in all, after so many years, there have been just 4. But from 1995, NTSB has been recommending that an imaging device be placed in the cockpit so that they get to know the body language or what was going on in the cockpit, what were the pilots, which switches were they operating, so as to know what exactly the behavior aspects. So is it useful or not? That is debatable. So in 1990, NTSB first cited the necessity for video recording in the cockpit, but FAA did not accept that. So later on in 2000, NTSB, after repeated requests or recommendations for an imaging device, they sent a 9-page recommendation to FAA arguing installation of a video by 2005. Of course, that didn't happen because there was a lot of opposition. And at the end, NTSB has a list of most wanted lists. So they placed it in the most wanted list, which normally gets the highest priority or is seen by the regulators, other regulators, ICAO, even their Congress, as the most wanted or required list. So it was placed on that. And even in the latest accident report, which has come out of the Atlas Air, there too, similarly, NTSB has recommended that imaging devices be placed on board so that the investigators have the ease or they have more access to information and can find out the cause, probable cause. ICAO Annex 6 was lately revised in 2018 that a Class A airborne imaging recorder, AIR, should be placed on board, but it was a rider. So Class A AIR is basically the one which records the flight deck. There are other classes which record only the panels, like you have the PFT, ND. So what was the panel and the position of the switches. So Class A is full access, wherein except for the head and shoulder, which should be masked, everything else is recorded. So in the regulations, and if you look at specific to India, Indian regulations have also been amended along with Annex 6, and this requirement is there. It is defined, but not yet implemented. So there's a small note underneath which says that this is not yet implemented, but they have laid down the standards. So note 1 says to respect crew privacy, the cockpit area view may be designed as far as practical to exclude the head and shoulder of crew members while seated in a normal operating position. So does this constitute an invasion of privacy? Let's see. So what is privacy? We have CVR recordings, which you could find in any social media. You go on internet, you search for CVR recordings, you'll have plenty of CVR recordings, which proves that there is no privacy or it cannot be protected, even though there may be regulations. But the system has failed to protect the privacy. And it can have a number of repercussions on flying as well. In 1987, especially, one particular case where New York Times published excerpts of CVR even before NTSB CVR group had the first meeting. So this is quite preposterous. How can they publish it? How did they have access, especially in a place like USA where there are stringent rules? 82 to 2000 in 1996 saw 3 accidents and 342 deaths. If you compare to medical profession, as per the National Academy of Sciences, it estimates in 2000 between 44,000 and 98,000 deaths in USA due to medical errors in the hospitals. There was a provision again to install cameras, but so far that has not been implemented. In order to preserve the pilot's expectation of privacy and to restrict the CVR tape recordings to their original intended use, Congress amended the ISBA Independence Theft Act 1990, formulating a bright line rule to clearly define the permissible uses of CVR and their products. But there are so many loopholes. So initially, the Congress said that CVR will not be used except for investigation purposes. But if the court demands it, then that is a piece of evidence. So that is, as per the discovery element, that becomes an evidence, and it is a valuable evidence. Of course, I don't deny that CVR should be used. It is a very vital instrument, and the recordings are, or rather, give a lot of information of what was going on in the cockpit, and you can correlate the other parameters. But there has to be a system of so there has to be a system which protects the privacy, so that the flight crew especially, they are comfortable that this system will not be misused, or the system will not misuse it. The pilots union, of course, they opposed. Airline Pilots Association strongly opposed the cockpit image recordings because the benefits of video imaging are vastly overrated as per them, and because far more effective tools exist, not only to obtain the safety data necessary to accurately investigate an accident, but also to prevent future accidents. So the case was built on 4 accidents in say from 1990, even if you take 1990. So in 30 years, there have been 4 accidents for which reasons could not be determined. And for that, imaging is required by NTSB. But based on this probability, how does it outweigh the privacy laws? If you compare the number of accidents on Indian roads, 150,000 deaths per year. So that is the number of motor vehicle accident deaths. The train accident deaths are a bit less, or quite less, especially in the last few years, but still they are more than the deaths caused by air traffic. And if you see medical error deaths, they are still largely because of one error in the surgery process. Other is the medication in the hospitals and the standards of hospital wherein people get infected. So even in US, a lot of deaths are caused after the patient is admitted to the hospital because of secondary infection. So is it really a vital requirement as proposed by NTSB? Then we have to look at the laws. What do the laws say? So now the experts were referred by the pilots, and as per them, imagery unlikely to produce or provide detailed data as promised with accuracy for accident investigation. So as of today, there is no comprehensive device which is available. So the system is going ahead and promulgating a regulation for imagery. Underneath, there is a note that it is not effective so far. So when you have promulgated the rule, which means soon that note will be removed as soon as you have the technology or you have a buy-in from the pilots. Even for the CVR in the USA, there is an agreement between the airlines and the pilots. It is a written agreement on the use of CVR. For what all purposes will the CVR be used? In India, there is nothing. It is only the Accident Investigation Act 2017, which says that the CVR recordings and other image recordings will be used only for investigation purposes unless there are certain riders wherein national, international interests on the investigations outweigh the need for privacy. And this will not be used for any other purpose. That is in the Accident Investigation Act. So DFTR data is unambiguous and is being enhanced. So a lot of other parameters are being recorded in DFTR, which give a better picture. So you can have a computer simulation of what exactly was going on. And now you have ejectable recorders. So in case of an accident before the crash, the CVR or LVR will be ejected from the flight deck so that in case, basically to protect from the accident impact, or if it is in the ocean, it is easy to retrieve. AIR could lead to investigators reaching a flawed and premature conclusion. So if you see something, you're likely to be biased. But if you're going in the reverse manner, which means you have nothing on your hand, then you're doing a more in-depth investigation. But if you see a recording, the first thing, as per the psychologist, the first conclusion you come to, you rather stick to that. So that is the human bias aspect will affect this. Critical measures, as suggested by experts, will enhance safety as compared to AIR. So we rather look at accident investigation reports and the reactive or proactive and predictive measures rather than the necessity for having AIR on board. Given historical evidence, it is impossible to safeguard AIR evidence. International laws are based on the human rights principles. So international principles on application of human rights to communications and surveillance at workplace, basically. So the legality is any limitation to the right to privacy must be prescribed by law. There has to be a law promulgated, which means the parliament has to enact a law based on which the policy or regulation should be there. Second is legitimate aim. Laws should only permit communication surveillance by a specified state authority to achieve legitimate aim. So not everybody can do it, only a certain body can do it. So what is the necessity? Laws permitting communication surveillance by the state must limit surveillance to that which is strictly demonstrably necessary to achieve legitimate aim. So there has to be a legality, a legitimate aim, and necessity. Further, adequacy and instance of communication surveillance authorized by law must be appropriate to fulfill the specific legitimate aim defined. And proportionality. The communication surveillance should be regarded as a highly intrusive act that interferes with rights to privacy and freedom of opinion and expression, threatening the foundations of democratic society. So basically, the law says that privacy is a right or a fundamental right of every citizen. But under circumstances, certain specified given circumstances, it can be taken away for specific purposes. It cannot be a blanket carte blanche for anybody and everybody to look into. Under only specific purposes for a specific time. So if you are at workplace, there are surveillance cameras, but those are general surveillance cameras. But if somebody installs the camera at your work desk, which monitors you at all the 8 hours you're working, so then that becomes a privacy issue. For that, there have to be specific rules. If you come to India and the privacy laws, the laws are very basic. The Constitution in Article 21 specifies the protection of life and personal liberty. So these are also derived basically from international laws. No person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law. So the Constitution also says that there has to be a law. Now further, there was nothing. So recently, based on a case, the Supreme Court gave a verdict wherein they drew similarities with the earlier human right law, and they came up that yes, it is a fundamental right, but under circumstances, they specified. The Supreme Court clarified that the fundamental right to privacy is not absolute and will always be subject to reasonable restrictions. Held that the state can impose restrictions on the right to privacy to protect legitimate state interests, but it can also do so by following three pronged summarized below. The test says that there should be a law, existence of a law. Second is legitimate state aim or need. The third is the means adopted by the state are proportional to the objects and needs sought to be fulfilled by the law. So similar to the human rights, the first three rights are there has to be a law. Do we have a law in aviation? No, there is no law. There is a law for protection. For use, there is no law. That is only in case of an accident that law comes into force, but otherwise, there is no law which protects the privacy. Legitimate state aim or need, yes, there is a need for accident investigation. But for CVR, FDR, and if AIR comes in any form, they have to specify and justify the need. So there has to be a comparison with other industries. What are the safety requirements and what is the need? So a probability of 4 accidents in 30 years, does it necessitate AIRs? There would be costs implications also. And the means adopted by the states are proportional to the object's needs. So again, there has to be a justification. The only act which we have, Accident Investigation Rule 2017, which gives the powers and duties of the investigators. So in the point C, it says to require and enforce production of all books, paper documents, and any articles included but not limited to flight data recorder and CVR, cockpit voice recorder. So they have access to this. Non-disclosure of records. They say the following records shall not be disclosed for purposes other than investigation of the accident or incident, except when the central government determines that the disclosure outweighs the adverse domestic international impact such action may have on the investigation or any future investigations. The cockpit voice recording and the transcripts from recordings and the AIR. Laws and regulations, when we see, there's a difference. So we have the civil aviation requirement, the cars, and the law. The law comes from the parliament, wherein it is debated. Whereas CAR comes from the DGCA, wherein they come up with a draft regulation, which is put up for public comments. But public comments come in, we don't know how they're disposed. And the rule comes in, the requirement, CR comes in. So laws and regulations are quite similar in the sense that they all specify and organize what the authorizing body feels as appropriate behavior. So they tell you what to do and what not to do. Laws and regulations under the statute have to hold public hearings open to any interested in testifying for public comment. So for the regulations, the requirements CAR, public comments are invited. And for the law, you have a debate in the parliament. Laws and regulations are also enforced by authorities. So in case of a violation, it can attract penalties. How are they different? As I said, that one is in the one is processed through the parliament in the form of a bill. Other is created by the government agency or the DGCA after giving prior notice. So with regulations, any agency holds a public hearing or asks for comments. They can change, adopt, or reject the regulation. Laws are also rules that govern everyone equally, while regulation only affects those who deal directly with the agency who's enforcing them. So like the law we have at present in India, we have the Investigation Act. Investigation Act pertains only to AAIB, Accident Investigation Board, and after the accident, it is effective. But the CVR may be used as per the CAR, which is not a law passed by the DGCA. So that does not come under the purview of any law. So how does it hold any legality? This is just an example in the CAR, which says in point 6.2 of the CAR, Section 5, Series F, Part 1. Proactive program. The proactive program is aimed to detect the weak areas in the system through various measures as mentioned below, which should be taken on a regular basis. The value of the retrieved data from the CVR and DFTR has been proven. Periodic monitoring of CVR and DFTR must be carried out by all operators. So if you see the legality, we have the CVR and the DFTR. Periodic monitoring to be done by the operators. So this does not come under the purview of any law. So is there a law? No, this is not a law. This is a CER issued by the DGCA. Is it reasonable? Well, the main purpose of a CVR and DFTR is to use for accident investigations and nothing beyond that. So this is monitoring the SOP. So it does not come under the purview. It is not reasonable at all. Does it ensure privacy? No, it does not ensure privacy. Because a lot of safety experts, after hearing the CVR or reading the DFTR, will become judgmental. They might form an opinion about a person, about an airline, based on the extra information that they have. It must be limited only to the accidents, for which primarily it was formed. So to conclude, I can say that CVR and DFTR is an important tool for accident investigation, but AIR is going a step beyond. The advantages of it are not very clear. The NTSP submitted only a 9-page report. So for an important decision, a 9-page report is not substantial. The use of CVR has to be restricted to investigation alone, and the security has to be ensured. In India, especially, like I showed you the regulations permits CVR to be used for SOP monitoring, which is beyond the purview. And it is an invasion of privacy because there is no law. And if you take the 3 principles that is stated, the first is there has to be a law. So it goes down on that. It is not reasonable and it's not proportional. Airborne imaging is construed as invasion of privacy, and the benefits are not verifiable. So unless you have a strong case which justifies the use just because it has been promulgated or put in the most wanted list, IQ has taken it up, put it in the Annex 6 with a note that this is not effective. But the fact that they have promulgated the regulation, which means at certain stage or at later stage, that note would be removed and it would be effective. law on aviation data privacy needs to be promulgated in order to protect CVR, FTR. Now we have the CPDLC data and in the future AIR. Thank you very much for your attention. Now we can have a small discussion in case anybody has some questions. And of course, the content would be on mindFly blog, on the Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and you have the Gmail ID. Thank you very much. And over to Sargam. I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Captain Amit. We have a small gathering today. I think everybody can speak if they wish to. So talking about all these issues of privacy and all, what about the cost effectiveness of having cameras on board?
So if you see the process, any new regulation by ICAO, there is a lot of in-depth study which goes on prior to this, prior to coming to a conclusion that there is a necessity. In this particular case, in the case of airborne imaging, like I said, it was only a 9-page justification which the NTSB handed over to FAA. And even in ICAO, there is no economic aspect. So for even if you see the NEO case, wherein there are so many revisions and modifications for the engines, for every modification, the cost impact is calculated, which means the man hours required and how much money would be spent on spares and other factors. So that has to be weighed. So is it really such a big safety issue that we put the aircrafts down, do retrofitting, or install new equipment on the later aircrafts, effective maybe a few years down the line? So nothing is mentioned. So this is one peculiar case wherein NTSB is insisting, yes, it has to be done, but I feel a lot of thought has not been put to it.
Right. Also, there would be a lot of psychological impact on the pilots and, in certain cases, on the families as well, if they happen to watch some videos which have been put online. So what are your thoughts on that?
That is one of the points which the airline union, pilots union, have raised, that once it goes out on social media, as most of the CVR recordings have been,
Right.
so people can hear the last few words of the crew. So that does not give a closure if the families hear it. So that is not what is desirable of the system. So now if you have images of the crew before an accident, that would be even worse. So the negative, the downside is that outweighs the advantages which gives, and we have seen in the historically, the system has not been able to protect the CVR recordings. It has been leaked. So there is no guarantee that the AIR would not be leaked. And what are the advantages that we are getting from it? First, let us look at the foundation of training and advantage of the reports. So we are not doing that. Rather than we are jumping that we want more. So for little more information, we're compromising a lot more. That is what
right. That is exactly what I was coming to next, that instead of going in for cameras, shouldn't we be looking at the training, the risk assessment, the hazard risk assessment instead?
Yeah, you look at the safety management system, which is a comprehensive system. I was looking at the IQ report. Only 3 states of the 193 states of IQ members have complied with the level 4, which is fully implemented, the state safety program. And rest, I think 53 states are in the process. So where are the 136 states? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
So if IQ is not able to enforce safety management system, which is a comprehensive, systematic process of managing safety, then I don't think this AIR is of any use, because if people are not committed to safety, how will they be committed? How will this have any effect? Again, the recommendations will go out. The recommendations from the investigation go into files basically, and they keep lying there. I've read one investigation wherein the investigator himself has written that these are repeated issues which come up in audits and other investigations, and there is no point if it ends up in files. So there has to be action on investigations. So if you cannot be predictive or proactive, at least be reactive. So even that is not happening. So if the system is not working, then of course AI is of no use as per me.
Yeah, if safety and training were strong enough, I don't think we would need any cameras in the cockpit in the first place.
So
So,
the trust, basically the trust is not there. So you don't have trust, you say we put cameras. So that is not the solution.
and again, like we've discussed in a lot of other sessions, it's more reactive. It's not a proactive step, putting cameras in cockpit.
Like you have CCTV cameras, you have cameras on for the traffic, road traffic. Does not mean
Yeah,
that people stop speeding. They do speed, but you have to bring about a change in attitude. So this was demonstrated. The biggest example was the seat belt. So wearing of seat belt was not mandatory, but the rule came out because there was statistics. Statistics said that seat belts would protect so many lives because maximum deaths happen because of impact. Need not be a high speed impact, it can be a slow speed impact, wherein the
right.
other person could be at high speed, you could be at a slow speed. So seat belts were necessary. Initially, there was a lot of resistance, but it is not a single strategy which works that you come up with a rule and a penalty, it will work. So you have to change the culture. So culture, you have to give certain benefits or advantages or reward people for doing the right job, and on the other hand punish people for doing the wrong job. So it
Yeah,
is a long process wherein it could take a generation to change, but you have to initiate the process at some stage, which we are not
that,
doing. No, in aviation that trust is not there and nobody's building it.
yeah, I think that's the problem in general in the country. There's a lot of trust deficit. So also, I think interpretation of the video images can be very subjective. It could be very personal as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so as far as video is concerned, it has been seen when there's an observer on board. So if it is a check ride, the trainer is sitting behind as an observer, the stress levels are high. Now, if you have an imaging camera, that is also an observer, which means you are conscious that somebody is always watching you. So you are there's double pressure. So there is stress. So that is a known fact that if you are if you have even a small failure, so you will be under stress that you have to do the right thing, and you have to make sure that everything falls in place. So you're not flying the aircraft, you're flying what people normally do is flying for the FDR, which means they
Right,
fly the FDR parameters rather than flying the aircraft. Similarly, you have to take the right actions. You should not move your head so much or arms so much, so you will be more conscious. Secondly, an action on the switch, if recorded by a camera, does not guarantee that switch was pressed. That only FDR can give you better information, which
right,
means if, say, the rudder pedal, if the pilot pressed the rudder pedal or the rudder pedal moved because of the rudder movement. So it could move in two ways. But an image will not give you that information. If you're pressing a switch, did the pilot actually press it, or he took his hand towards it, touched it, and came back? So they can be, it can be misinterpreted in a lot of ways.
exactly. That is what. And we spoke in the webinar about artificial intelligence that maybe camera in the cockpit might be a useful tool for training, but not
Certainly,
necessarily.
That has been demonstrated. Again, from the trainer's point of view, the trainer is sitting behind. The trainer doesn't know where the pilots are looking, which instrument and which parameter are they looking. Is
Right.
their gaze fixed? Are they in the cognitive mode or they have frozen? And so artificial intelligence can basically detect all these through the eye movement, retina tracking, and behavioral. So they can measure the heart rate going up, and they can train in real time, basically. So if the system is programmed that a particular maneuver has to be performed in a particular way, so the system knows the pilot's input, are they adequate or inadequate, and that can give a real time feedback to the pilot and train in this process. So that is of much higher value in training rather than
Right.
in real life. So that is one of the
In
preventive ways that makes your enhances your safety. So there won't be a need for the cameras in the cockpit.
cameras in the cockpit. Again, everything comes down to training and your basic foundation. So uh, I don't see any questions coming in today.
Maybe it's webinar fatigue.
Yeah, I think it's been too much for everyone. All right, so should we wrap up then? And anything that you would like to say or talk about next week?
Oh, we'll try to modify our webinars or make it more interesting or increase the reach. So next time we'll try something else and we can announce it midweek.
Right, we can do
Yep.
that.
And Sham wants to say something.
I'll unmute.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening from Nepal.
Hello.
Good evening.
Actually, I'm with Sita here, and we operate like a Dornier 228, and this is almost more than 30 years old aircraft, and it records basically primary parameters in the FDR. So, like new generation aircrafts, we do not have much information from the FDR, and that's why we try to talk with our pilots to put like a GPRO in the cockpit. So they were very reluctant. I think in aviation, whatever goes in the cockpit remains in the cockpit. This thing goes on. So we came up with another approach. Like we started doing a pilot profiling, and we are just beginning it, like making a pilot profiling from its initial training. So we are focusing on pilot profiling, like and I notice that the approach we are taking is very important with the latest NTSB report on that atmosphere with respect to the co-pilots hiring and training and employment issues. So
Mhm.
for operator like me with a small fleet and old aircraft, it's only stall aircraft. So we need to, instead of focus on cockpit in the camera in the cockpit, we should focus on the pilot profiling. That is my view, and I wanted to share with you. Not very particular question, but I wanted to share.
No,
And anyway, we are only six of people right now today.
Yeah.
So I thought I'll share my thought. Thank you.
no. So I agree with you. Either you have intelligence from the data or you have human intelligence. So you have more of human intelligence telling you what needs to be done. So your pilots are with you. So they are giving you information rather than you getting information from FDR. So it amounts to the same thing. So long you have that trust and there is an agreement. So it is a kind of a law. So law also says if there is an agreement, so that can be promulgated into a law so that nobody objects.
Yeah,
So in
it's a
a
kind of very informal thing, at
yeah.
the moment.
So for your setup, it is working. So for a larger setup, maybe. So your setup works on trust that yes, this will not be misused. So that is the issue. So it's working fine for you. So that is good.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for your
Hope to
input.
see you in the next webinar.
And I
What do you
think,
want to see?
Yeah, we'll. Yeah, thank you.
all right. I think profiling anyway is a good way to track the progress of pilots. Even though in larger airlines it may be slightly tedious, but I think mostly even I have seen wherever in the airlines that I've worked, the records are not revisited mostly, and it's forgotten what had happened earlier. And the weaknesses remain as weaknesses, and there is kind of a progression which goes unnoticed. So I think that's
Yep.
a good thing to do anyway.
So basically, the foundation has to be like in the Atlas Air accident.
Yeah.
They noticed that the co-pilot had failed his command, and the company did not have prior information. So he had a tendency, his reactions to unexpected situations
Yeah.
were not appropriate.
Yeah.
So things like this, but once you know that a person has failed, then there has to be a reason. So reason can be investigated further. Of course, there are loopholes. So that is why the hiring process has to be stringent, and of course, the training process. Nobody is perfect. So again, it boils down to selection and training.
Selection, training, and
Those
all
are
the
the
additional,
yeah. So
yeah,
those
your
are
additional
better safeguards than
than a camera.
electronic surveillance. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Right. So next week, of course, we will midweek. I think we will talk about what we would do next weekend. Any topics in mind, Captain Amit?
So we'll come up with something new. So we'll announce with you. We can conclude today's.
Right. So anyway, I think
Thank
we,
you. Good night.
Thank
right,
you.
like we've already spoken that more than the cameras, it's important to focus on training and your risk assessment and your safety uh, more than anything else. And I think it would be wiser to spend more on better data recorders, because I think you get more information from that and more objective data from that.
Mhm.
And of course, like we said, cameras could be a useful tool for training. And as long as we give more importance to training, things should be fine. So I thank everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next Saturday with a new topic and a new format, most probably. Right. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, Captain Amit.
Thank you very much.